Good morning. I'm Kenya McDuffie, council member at large and chair of the council's Committee on Business and Economic Development. Today is Tuesday, April 30th, 2024, and we're convening this hearing in a hybrid fashion, both via Zoom and from room 500 of the John A. Wilson Building. This hearing is also being streamed live on the council's website. Time is 9:33 a.m. and I'm calling to order this budget oversight hearing. This is the committee's third budget oversight hearing for the fiscal year 2025 budget season. District government is in a different place financially than it was and had been, frankly, for previous years. Last year, we dealt with some lapsing federal funds meant to assist with pandemic recovery and with concerns that the District of Columbia government may have lower than expected revenue projections. As we look to fiscal year 2025, the district's revenues are growing more slowly than our spending. This is the key structural problem that we face. On top of that, Federal Recovery Act funding has expired. The Chief Financial Officer is insisting on refilling more quickly than planned a local reserve fund, and the district's commercial office sector is continuing to adjust to new work patterns. As a result, our budget leaves us with some really tough decisions to make. The council must work to ensure that these tough decisions and cuts are not disproportionately borne by our most vulnerable residents. And this morning, we're going to hear from a couple of government witnesses regarding the agency fiscal year 2025 budget for the following agencies: the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking, as well as the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration. Government witnesses will each have 7 minutes for opening statement, and that's going to be followed by rounds of questions if any of my colleagues from the committee or other colleagues, the council, join the hearing this morning. At this time, I want to check really quickly. Doesn't look like we've been joined by anybody just yet. Therefore, I'm going to turn to our first government witness with the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking. The mission of DSB, as it's also known, is to cultivate a regulatory environment that protects consumers and attracts and retains financial services firms to the District of Columbia, empower and educate residents on financial matters, and provide financing for District of Columbia small businesses. The proposed fiscal year 2025 operating budget for DSB is approximately $36.1 million, which represents a 7.3% decrease from its fiscal year 2024 approved operating budget of approximately $38.9 million. DSB proposed operating budget is entirely comprised of special purpose revenue funds. The proposed budget includes 151 full-time equivalents, which is a decrease of 8 FTEs from the fiscal year 2024 approved budget. With that, I'm going to turn to our first government witness, Commissioner Karima Woods. It's tradition of the committee to swear in all of our government witnesses, and so I'm going to ask you and anyone else on your team who plans to testify this morning to raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm on the penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide to the Council of the District of Columbia and the Committee on Business and Economic Development is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you each for joining us this morning. I'm going to turn to you, Commissioner, for your statement. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson McDuffie, Committee on Business and Economic Development members and staff. I am Karima Woods, Commissioner of the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking, also referred to as DSB. I'm pleased to appear before the committee today to provide testimony on DSB's FY25 budget, which will build upon the successes that DSB accomplished in FY23 and 24 to date. Mayor Bowser recently presented her fiscal year 2025 budget, Fair Shot, Strategic Investments, and Shared Sacrifice. This budget focuses on strategic investments and shared sacrifices and addresses the confluence of post-pandemic factors impacting district residents. It builds on the mayor's recovery budget from last year as the district focuses on its comeback from the pandemic while addressing residents' critical social, economic, and health needs. This budget also demonstrates the mayor's unwavering commitment to building a safer, stronger, healthier, and more equitable DC. DSB regulates insurance, securities, banking, and other financial services in the District of Columbia. Our mission is threefold. First, to cultivate a regulatory environment that protects consumers and attracts and retains financial services firms to the district. Second, to empower and educate residents on financial matters. And third, to provide financing to district small businesses. We accomplish this by working to ensure district residents have access to a wide choice of financial services and are treated fairly by service providers. We also work to sustain a district business climate that encourages fair and open competition. The mayor's FY25 budget provides DSB with the necessary resources to fulfill our mission of protecting consumers, helping to create pathways to the middle class, and supporting small business and economic development growth in the district. The mayor's FY25 budget for DSB is $36,098,618, a 7.3% decrease from our approved FY24 budget. The proposed budget is funded entirely by special purpose revenue O-type funds. The FY25 budget supports 151 full-time employees, a decrease of 8 FTE positions from our FY24 budget. DSB's budget reductions, which are shared across district government in the coming fiscal year, are primarily attributable to the end of ARPA funding. This budget recognizes a commitment from the mayor to continue the important programming and staffing levels, and we will ensure that agency operations continue to positively impact the financial well-being of district residents. Now I will provide a brief overview of how DSB fulfills its mission with a few recent successes and plans as we move forward into the fiscal year and prepare for the next one. DSB's Office of Financial Empowerment and Education, also known as OFEE, was established in FY 2020 to provide district residents with new tools and programs to ensure financial empowerment and access. Though OFEE is still a relatively new division, its services provide crucial support to district residents' efforts to improve their financial health and well-being. I am pleased to share that OFEE's important work will not be adversely impacted by budget reductions to several programs in its portfolio. Programs like Bank on DC, Financially Fit DC, and Opportunity Accounts will continue to provide meaningful programming and outreach in all 8 wards. We look forward to continuing to forge a path to financial education and empowerment across the district in FY25. In FY25, DSB's funding levels for the Office of the Student Loan Ombudsman will continue to support district residents with education and individual assistance regarding student loans. During the first 6 months of this fiscal year, the Ombudsman has provided financial education to more than 2,000 current borrowers and future college students through 17 successful outreach events. During that same time, the Ombudsman met with 62 district residents and/or district employees with an accumulated student loan debt of $4.1 million to resolve their complaints. The Ombudsman's efforts directly led to more than $100,000 of public service loan forgiveness for district residents and District of Columbia government employees. Since the establishment of the Office of the Student Loan Ombudsman in 2017, 504 borrowers with a combined debt of $41,348,000 have received assistance, including $2,524,000 in public service loan forgiveness. Another important way that DSB fulfills its mission is assisting homeowners in keeping their homes by actively seeking to prevent foreclosures. In FY24 to date, The foreclosure prevention and mediation program has been successful in helping 82 homeowners obtain relief under the Homeowners Assistance Fund. Also in FY24 to date, the foreclosure prevention program has prevented 142 foreclosures through March. These efforts resulted in preserving more than $57.1 million in property value in the first 2 quarters of FY24. Through the department's District of Columbia Business Access Program, also known as DC BizCap, we continue to provide necessary capital to district small business owners and entrepreneurs, including those who are certified business enterprises and minority and women-owned. In FY24 to date, DC BizCap has funded 3 state small business credit initiatives transactions and co-investment through the Innovation Finance Program and 2 loans supported through the Collateral Support Program totaling $187,000. The capital provided through DC BizCap was leveraged to access more than $375,000 in loans and investments. As a result of the support provided to these 3 organizations, more than 40 district-based jobs were created or retained. At the end of FY23, DISB received $19.8 million from the U.S. Department of Treasury to support small businesses in the district. This is the first of 3 tranches of funding totaling $62 million that will be used to provide more private capital to assist district small businesses. In closing, the resources allocated to DISB will play a critical role in supporting the mayor's comeback plan. We remain committed to collaborating with you and the entire council on the department's vital mission to protect consumers, empower residents about their financial well-being, and invest in district small businesses. I am optimistic about the continued positive impact that DISB will have on district residents and small businesses in FY25. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Commissioner. I got some questions I'd like to ask, perhaps not as many in past years, given how lean this budget is and the decreases within your agency. But I think I'm going to start with a follow-up question from the committee's budget oversight hearing that we did for our public witnesses. During that hearing some weeks ago, the committee received testimony from the CEO of the Capital Area Asset Builders, which is an organization I know you and your team are very familiar with. Mr. Lightman Santa Cruz was concerned about the $900,000 reduction to the DC Opportunity Accounts in DISB's proposed FY25 budget. And my understanding is that the $1.7 million in federal ARPA funds were removed due to the funds expiring, and that both opportunity accounts and financial coaching for returning citizens will be partially continued with some of the agency's special purpose revenue funding. Let me start by asking you, is that an accurate account of where things are?
Yes, that is an accurate account.
And how much was approved for each program? You referenced a few of the programs that have been successful. I know are very popular in the community. In your testimony, you mentioned a few of them. How much was approved for the Opportunity Accounts program, and how much was approved for the Financial Coaching for Returning Citizens program in FY 2024? And how much is in the budget for 25, if anything?
Yes, thank you for the question, and we thank Mr. Lightman Santa Cruz for his testimony. In FY24, the Financial Coaching for Returning Citizens budget was approved. The ARPA budget was approved for a total of $666,000. That's both for the NPS and also PS. For the NPS, it was $415,000. For opportunity accounts in FY24, the ARPA budget PS was $798,000, and for NPS was $798,000, and for PS it was $249,000.
Okay.
And in terms of FY 25, the financial coaching for returning citizens FY 25 budget that was approved is of 600,000 for the Financial Empowerment Center. 483,000 of which is per a contract for UPO, and 800,000 for the Opportunity Accounts Program.
800,000 for the Opportunity Accounts Program?
Correct.
Okay. And you mentioned there was 483,000 for a UPO contract for FY 2025. Is there a similar contract this fiscal year?
That is included in the ARPA funds.
I got it. Okay. So it doesn't look like there'll be any significant reductions in either program, given that it appears you're making up for it from your own local budget.
That is correct.
Okay.
The majority of those reductions are really attributed to the decrease in outreach marketing, also decrease in one or two FTEs, but the core structure of the program will remain in place. And the work that we built up over the last couple of fiscal years will continue in FY 25 with a slight reduction in funding.
Okay. The proposed supplemental budget for fiscal year 2024 includes some smaller reductions to the same two programs, as well as other cuts and savings in special purpose revenue funds for a total reduction of $2.3 million. You kind of touched on how you all are sort of navigating some of the proposed cuts to these programs and other ones. And I know you expressed in your testimony that you all have the resources you need. Actually, I won't even ask you that question. I feel like you've covered that, but the public has heard a lot about how the FY 2025 budget for the district is going to be difficult. I know the mayor has expressed as much on multiple occasions. I've expressed it. My colleagues at the council, chairman, others have talked about it. But the impact on agencies will be varied. In fiscal year 2025, DSB is proposed to derive all of its revenue from special purpose revenue funds. For the benefit of the public, if you could, I'd love for you to describe what that means and how this differs from revenue source from district taxpayers.
Absolutely. And thank you for that question. So special purpose revenue funds are revenues that are generated from the fines, fees, special assessments, and charges of services that DSB collects through the financial service entities that we regulate. Our budget is primarily comprised of special purpose revenue funds. We're a revenue generating agency. We use O-type funds. And so the special purpose revenue money goes into the general fund, and the special purpose revenues are what are also used for the department to operate. So our entire budget is comprised of special purpose revenue dollars.
And the agency's FY 2025, actually the BSA that the mayor sent down to the council proposes to include a subtitle that would increase the amount transferred from the Securities and Banking Regulatory Trust Fund from that fund to local funds to the tune, I think it's from $11.63 million to $12.63 million starting in FY 2025. And given that this fund is required to be spent on Securities and Banking Bureau to carry out its duties first, do you anticipate this is going to have any effect on your agency's operations? And secondly, do you have any concerns with this subtitle that's before us and the committee?
So we do anticipate that there will be a minor effect on the agency's operations. But as we have assessed the total budget, we have really determined that across the board, we can continue to provide the necessary regulatory functions and key programs and services, even with the cut to the budget. We'll continue to look for ways to generate additional revenues and also maybe even identify additional grants to supplement any funding levels. But overall, we anticipate that we will be able to continue the necessary functions even with this reduction.
Okay. Turning briefly to the committee's focus and priority around racial equity, economic opportunity, and security. If you could take a moment to identify maybe one or two programs or specific funding allocations in DSB's proposed budget for fiscal year 2025 that you believe are specifically designed to address racial or economic inequities or to create opportunities to close the racial wealth gap in the District of Columbia. What specifically do you see within your budget as a tool to try to address some of the economic opportunities that I think are sorely needed for certain residents across the District of Columbia?
So thank you for the question. And yes, there are two programs that come to mind, and I also referenced them in my testimony. The first is DC BizCap, and we've presented to the committee year over year about, one, the significance of DC BizCap as an access to capital program, but more importantly, how the program in its entirety has been instrumental in providing funding to minority and women-owned businesses. And we see that as an effective tool to address racial inequities here in the district and an effective way to support the mayor's comeback plan. As you're aware, council member, the department has received an additional 19.8 million in capital from Treasury Department, and we are moving that funding forward and partnering with CDFIs to get those funds out of the door. And we anticipate that the majority of that funding will go to minority and women-owned businesses. Another important tool, and I referenced it in our testimony and mentioned it earlier, is through our financial empowerment education efforts. When I really look across the agency, there are a number of programs that I think really do a great job of being in the community and really serving various demographics here in the district, particularly our most vulnerable residents, and it's through the Financial Empowerment and Education Office. So that includes our DC Opportunity Accounts program, which is our match savings program, our Bank on DC program, our Financially Fit DC, and our Financial Empowerment Center, which is located in Ward 8 at the United Planning Organization. So I anticipate that this will continue and that these programs will continue to meet the critical need of our residents and address racial inequities. I also would like to add that we are drafting department's Racial Equity Action Plan. The plan follows the 4 shared goals that are identified in the Office of Racial Equity's action plan. And so we are in the process of identifying our 3-year roadmap, and we'll be presenting that plan to the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity. And we're also part of a pilot for agency levels regarding REAP. And so that work will continue, and we'll have more to report out on the committee about our Racial Equity Action Plan.
Okay, thank you for that. You referenced in your response as well as in your opening testimony, DC BizCap, you mentioned the SSBCI program and the collateral support programs. Can you or a member of your team talk a little bit more about the investments that have been made specifically with respect to those programs. In your testimony, you mentioned that there's been 3 state small business credit initiative transactions, 1 co-investment through the Innovation Finance Program, and 2 loans supported through the Collateral Support Program. Can anybody talk a little bit more about those?
Absolutely. So since the inception of the program, we have been instrumental in helping to create over 2,000 jobs and over 20.3 million in capital to over 40 plus businesses here in the district. The majority of which I would say well over 75% have been minority and woman owned. I do have some data points about it, but can also follow up with the committee with more pointed, accurate data points. But in FY23, I know that we funded 4 small businesses. FY24 to date, there have been additional 3 transactions to support this program. We are today actually partnering with the DC Health Link and DC Chamber of Commerce and Department of Small and Local Business Development for their Small Business Summit. We continue to identify ways to reach businesses in a multitude of different ways, depending upon kind of where they're at in their size and scale. And so we see this as an ongoing success and something that we are continuing in this fiscal year through the additional funding that we're receiving.
And so the additional funding that you're receiving that you also mentioned in your testimony, specifically the $19.8 million from the United States Department of the Treasury, with a total over 3 tranches of $62 million. Is that all going to DSB, or is that funding that's split between DSB and the the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development?
Yes, that is split between the DSB and also DMPED. And so I believe that DMPED is receiving $26 million for their venture capital program. And the rest of that allocation will be going to DSB. And so through that effort, we are partnering, as I mentioned, with CDFIs through new programs focused on small business, commercial real estate, focus on space and equipment loan programs, and also startup capital for small businesses as well.
Okay. And of the 26 million that you mentioned is going to DMPED, is that 26 million of the 62 million?
Yes. Of the 19.8, I believe it is 8.6 million.
To whom?
To DMPED.
To DMPED, okay.
So we received the capital in tranches, and so we have received the first tranche.
And then of the first tranche, is DSB, does that money that you received in the first tranche going to be used in one of the existing programs, or is it used to create a new program?
Well, the collateral support program will continue. So that has been our ongoing program where we collateralize loans for small businesses. The newer aspect of the funding will address those 3 different program areas that we'll be partnering with CDFIs on. So related to real estate, related to space and equipment, and then also small business loans for startup small business loans.
Will that be under the banner of a new program or initiative title? Like, how do we find where it is in your budget?
So it's all under DC BizCap. It doesn't necessarily have a new quote unquote title. Yeah.
And when, in terms of timing, do you plan to roll out the new portion of it that you're going to be working with some of the CDFIs to execute on?
That's actually happening now. And so I believe we have an RFP out to the CDFIs to respond to move those programs forward.
Okay.
But I can follow up with you on the exact timeline.
Okay. And is the plan to use 1 or more CDFIs for the program?
I'll follow up with
Okay.
you on
All right.
the exact number.
Yeah. Sounds like a really interesting program. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of interest in it. So definitely would love for you to follow up with us on that. And with respect to the $19.8 million from the Treasury Department, does it all need to be used or distributed in the form of loans, or is any portion available to use in the form of grants?
The Treasury dollars can only be used in the form of loans.
Okay. And that's, well, I won't ask you about DMPED. I'll ask them about it when it comes. All right, thank you for that. The proposed fiscal year 2025 budget for DISB, as you mentioned, is a little over $36 million. And it represents a 7.3% decrease from the approved fiscal year 2024 budget. The budget also includes a reduction of 8 FTEs. At the risk of being slightly redundant, I want to just ask specifically on the record, what, if any, impact will that reduction of FTEs and operating budget have on DISB services or programs?
So as I mentioned earlier, we anticipated this reduction in planning for FY24 and then in planning for FY25. We knew that we were going to have to revisit the budget to ensure, one, that the work that we had established through the ARPA funds would continue, but how we would continue that work, factoring it into our SPR funded budget. And so there will be minor impacts here and there, but I think the important takeaway is that the core infrastructure for our ARPA funded programs, particularly opportunity accounts and returning citizens, is solid and is in place thanks to the funding that we receive from ARPA.
Okay.
So that funding supported FTEs, that funding supported us putting in virtual capabilities and infrastructure, increasing our marketing and awareness about the program and the work. And so when I look at the reduction in funds, I recognize there is a reduction, but it's not going to negatively impact our ability to carry that work forward, especially since we have the FTEs dedicated to it. We have the partnerships in place. We have our contract with United Planning Organization. So all of that work will continue. We've had to thus modify some of the marketing, some of the virtual capabilities, and come up with new ways to reach the underserved, underrepresented populations here in the district.
Okay, let's talk specifically about the FTE positions at the agency for a moment. According to your Schedule A, well, let me just ask you, how many vacant positions are there at DISB presently?
We currently have 26 vacant positions, and 10 were eliminated. And so we have a net active of 16 vacant FTEs for FY25.
Got it. And how about for FY 2024 and your net active, you said 16. What about vacancy savings presently? How much, if any, vacancy savings are at the agency?
Good morning. So as of
You don't mind just mentioning your name for the record so we have it?
so Daraja Belai, Agency Fiscal Officer.
Thanks.
So as of today, we have projected 452,000 in vacancy saving after into consideration of all those 10 vacant, like mid-year cuts,
Got it. 52,000,
452,000.
452,000. And within the agency's NPS budget, the budget for contractual services has been reduced by approximately 35% from $8.1 million in the approved fiscal year 2024 budget to $5.3 million in the proposed fiscal year 2025 budget. Is any ongoing contractual work being eliminated? If so, any work of particular concern to the agency?
So upon assessing the budget, most of that reduction is attributed to reclassification and also reductions in our agency management program, our banking bureau, and also our Office of Financial Empowerment and Education. As mentioned, the bulk of that, 1.2 million, is a reduction from the ARPA funding, and the rest is across the board. So contracts related to public affairs and also banking, executive administration, some related to travel. So overall, the work is able to continue in these core areas, but just at a reduction.
And is it still accurate that the Office of the Student Loan Ombudsman is an office of the one FTE?
The Office of Student Loan Ombudsman has two FTEs. There is an interim student loan ombudsman, and there's also a student loan program analyst that focuses on student loan servicers.
Okay, and the interim ombudsman also holds the title of what position?
I believe, let me follow up on the exact title.
Okay. I'm curious about what other duties and responsibilities that individual has.
So in terms of duties, primarily outreach. So she, when we had the full-time ombudsman in place, was instrumental in focusing on student loan outreach. And so she has continued that effort in addition to focusing on the additional duties related to the student loan ombudsman role.
Okay, and how long has this individual been performing in the interim ombudsman role?
I would say shortly after our student loan ombudsman departed, so less than a year.
And have you advertised for the permanent position, or do you plan to in the near future?
Yes, we have posted the position and we are actively hiring for it.
Okay. The Office of Financial Empowerment and Education oversees the opportunity accounts, as well as the earned income tax credit preparation, financially fit, and bank on DC programs. It looks like Disby's budget now allots 7 FTEs to the City for Financial Empowerment Program for the implementation of the programs that I just mentioned. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay.
In the budget, it's 7 FTEs for the program for FY 25.
I'm sorry.
In the budget for FY 25, there's 7 FTEs allocated for the program.
Okay. So I guess I'm a little curious about how it's going to work, because what I'm looking at in the budget zeroes out earned income credit, financially fit, opportunity accounts. And maybe it puts it all in the category for, I guess this is R04603, City for Financial Empowerment. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. So the FY twenty-five budget, and DeRege, feel free to speak to it, but the FY twenty-five budget is a different format than previous years. And so we do have a separate line item for the Office of Financial Empowerment and Education. Previous budgets, OFEE and its programs were included under the Banking Bureau. So they have their own line item now in the budget, and all of that has been combined under the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. Through its corporate finance work, DISB reviews and analyzes securities offerings to investors to ensure full disclosure with the district securities laws. How will the reduction of $516,000 to corporate finance impact the department, and will any existing personnel be eliminated or shifted as a result?
So no existing personnel would be eliminated. We do have 2 FTEs that were eliminated that are currently vacant. I believe the primary reductions in the corporate finance budget is attributed to the STAR system, which is a technological platform that has been budgeted over 2 fiscal years. And so what you're saying is a reduction. There's a $400,000 base cost. And so 200,000 is in FY 24 and 200,000 is in FY 25. We were hoping to be able to get all of that completed, but I believe we spread it out over 2 fiscal years. So that's the primary reduction in the budget. There are also some other contractual services, and there's an additional increase of about 92,000 for the old STAR system as well.
Okay.
And a reduction related to travel.
Okay. Let's talk about your CBE spend for the agency. If you have it handy, could you share with the committee what your goal, the CBE spend goal, and the actual spend was for FY 22 and FY 23?
So for FY 22, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I can follow up with you. I know that year over year, we surpassed our goal. In FY 23, the goal was 95,000 and our SB spend was 1.5 million. So we surpassed that goal by 1,600%. For FY 24, the current goal is 4.7 million, and the unofficial SB expenditure to date is 1.5 million. Year over year, when we testify before the committee, the current SB spend goal hasn't yet been adjusted down. That usually happens over the next couple of months. And so we are anticipating that amount to be adjusted down, and we will surpass the goal for FY 24 as well.
Can you talk about the significant increase in the goal between fiscal year 2023 and 2024? I think you said that the goal for fiscal year 2023 originally was $95,000. And your goal for fiscal year 2024, which may or may not be adjusted down, is 4.7 million. Let's assume it is adjusted down to something closer to your actual spend in FY 2023. It's still significantly more than the goal for FY 2023 was originally.
So the original goal for FY 23 before it was adjusted down was approximately 1.7 million. Again, we anticipate each year that number will adjust down. And actually, I have been able to locate the FY 22 goal, which was a little over 2 million. And again, we surpassed that goal by 102% of 2.1 million. I believe for FY 24, the majority of that includes contracts like our contract with CAB, which is a nonprofit, so that doesn't qualify for the SBE portion. And so usually that's why we've had a year-over-year adjustment down in the goal. Not 100% clear as to what the additional contracts are that would increase it to that amount, but we do anticipate that the total goal will be adjusted down.
Okay. Are there any, I'm thinking about the challenges that the city faces financially. And the fact that there are any number of priorities, both with the executive as well as with the council, that won't get the same level of funding as they have in previous years. And I'm curious as whether or not you've looked at DISB's budget overall. And I want to ask, are there any programs within the agency that the council and this committee specifically should be evaluating for whether or not they're working, frankly? Any council mandated programs over the years that the council should be taking a second look at in terms of whether or not they are achieving their desired outcomes? I'm asking it, and I plan to ask of the other agencies that come before the committee, because I think there should be a process where we are evaluating things that aren't working to eliminate them and maybe reallocate funds toward things that are working. So have you got a chance to look at the agency's budget, and have you determined whether or not there are any programs that we should look at for efficacy?
So I think that's a great question, and actually consistent with some of our internal thinking about our programs. I would say as of now, I think all of the programs we currently have in place should continue. Some of our newer programs with our financial empowerment education work, we have had conversations around evaluating them to measure overall impact to determine one, whether or not all of the programs need to continue in its current structure or if there needs to be modifications, but more importantly, where we need to place more time and energy to have greater penetration and impact as it relates to supporting residents around their financial health and well-being. So at this time, there aren't any programs that I would recommend before the committee, but in knowing that I think it is important to assess and evaluate programs, especially long-term programs, to really determine which ones should continue or if there needs to be some changes in the way in which the program is structured. And we're having those conversations now.
Okay, that's something that the committee plans to keep a close eye on and really prioritize in terms of the committee's oversight of not only DISB, but all the other agencies within our cluster. And so I'm glad that you're internally are already looking at that. I certainly want to make sure that we're following up. And if you have additional thoughts on or any specific details around programs, initiatives, things that aren't working the way that have been attended or should be considered for reductions or eliminations, and I'd love for you to follow up with us.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the record before I move on to the next agency? I don't have any additional questions at this time.
Just want to thank you, Chairperson McDuffie, and thank you to your staff who've been great to work with. Also want to just acknowledge the mayor and thank her for her strategic investments in the FY25 budget for DISB. Also want to acknowledge the professional staff of DISB and thank them for their commitment to the mission and goals for the agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, the committee will turn to the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration, or ABCA, as it's also known. The mission of ABCA is to support the public's health, safety, and welfare through the control and regulation of the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages, as well as medical cannabis. The proposed fiscal year 2025 operating budget for ABCA is approximately $13.8 million, which represents a 4.6% increase from the fiscal year 2024 approved operating budget of approximately $13.2 million. ABCA's proposed operating budget is mostly comprised of special purpose revenue funds, The proposed budget includes 80 full-time equivalents or FTEs, an increase of 4 FTEs from the fiscal year 2024 approved budget. With that, I'm gonna call up Director Musali and any other members of the APCA team who plan to testify. And I'd like to welcome you all to the committee. We're still in the morning. Good morning to you. I'd love to swear you all in before we get started. If you can raise your right hands. Do you each swear or affirm on the penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide to the Council of the District of Columbia and the Committee on Business and Economic Development is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you very much. Again, good morning to you both. Thank you for joining us. Director, you can begin with your testimony whenever you're all settled in. Thanks. If you can turn your mic on for me and then start over.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson McDuffie, members and staff of the committee. I am Fred Musali, Director of the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration, also known as APCA. I am pleased to testify before you today on Mayor Muriel Bowser's fiscal year 2025 budget and financial plan entitled Fair Shot, Strategic Investments and Shared Sacrifice, the district's 29th consecutive balanced budget. Through strategic investments and shared sacrifice, this budget invests not only in a safer, stronger DC right now, but it also looks ahead 3, 4, and 5 years and includes investments that will accelerate our comeback and increase our capacity to make big investments into the out years of the financial plan. With regard to APCA, the mayor's FY 2025 budget allows our agency to continue to operate as a customer-friendly regulatory agency that businesses and members of the public can easily navigate. Our agency is excited that Mayor Bowser's FY 2025 budget puts our agency in an excellent position to successfully implement recent significant changes to the district's medical cannabis laws, including transitioning unlicensed establishments that applied to our agency to the legal medical cannabis market. I would like to personally thank the mayor for ensuring that our FY 25 budget provides our agency with the necessary staff and resources to succeed in meeting our goals. ABCA's FY 2025 budget is $13,822,262 with 80.3 full-time equivalent positions. ABCA is primarily a self-sufficient agency, with the agency poised to receive $371,000 in local funds to help support the district's medical cannabis program. ABCA's remaining FY 25 budget relies mostly on special purpose revenue funds collected by the agency. Today, I would like to discuss 1, ABCA's funding for the agency's sale to minor compliance check program, 2, ABCA's funding for cannabis enforcement, and 3, the addition of 5 new proposed FTEs to assist the agency in implementing the district's medical cannabis program. First, the agency's FY 2025 budget sufficiently funds ABCA's sale to minor compliance checks program. Through this program, trained minors assist ABCA investigators with checking licensed establishments to ensure that they are not selling alcoholic beverages to persons under the age of 21. Specifically, ABCA's FY 25 budget contains $68,000 for the agency to contract with a vendor to employ minors to conduct compliance checks for this program. This represents the same funding amount that was approved for FY 2024. This funding level is sufficient to allow ABCA to conduct underage drinking compliance checks throughout FY 25. Second, I would like to discuss the agency's FY 25 budget as it relates to cannabis enforcement. ABCA's FY 25 budget continues to provide funding for 1 supervisory investigator and 3 line investigators to conduct investigations and inspections involving both licensed and unlicensed cannabis establishments. These 4 positions will continue to be critical as ABCA works collaboratively with other district agencies to take enforcement action against unlicensed cannabis retailers. Finally, ABCA is pleased to note that the mayor's FY 25 budget would provide 5 new FTEs to the medical cannabis program. These added positions are critical to the success of the agency in implementing the medical cannabis program. The 5 positions proposed to include in the budget are a line attorney, HR officer, HR advisor, an executive assistant, and an operations manager. In closing, the resources allocated to ABCA will play a critical role in the district's financial comeback and will support residents and businesses' efforts to reach and remain on the pathway to the middle class by providing a safe and well-regulated environment. The council and the committee are critical allies in this effort. I appreciate your work to ensure we operate efficiently and effectively. I look forward to continuing our work together to achieve our shared goals and give all residents a fair shot. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering the committee's questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. Just a few questions for you. In response to the pre-hearing answers that you responded to the committee's questions, I want to thank you and your team for doing that. I have maybe one or two questions based on the testimony provided this morning. The proposed supplemental budget for APCA in the current fiscal year includes a total reduction of $740,967 in local funds, special purpose revenue, and dedicated taxes. How is the agency navigating this proposed reduction, and how, if at all, will it affect existing services that you all are providing?
Great question, council member. APCA is able to handle the costs for FY24. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So one of the major deductions is in the reimbursable detail program. It does leave the agency for $870,000 for the program for 24. Based on what we've spent so far, I can get into that if you want, but I know that may be another question. There's sufficient funding in the program for 24, so we expect the remaining revenues to allow for the program to be funded for the entire fiscal year 24. The local fund allocation we're able to handle, and then the other $346,000 was agency vacancy savings. So we used our vacancy savings.
How much was that?
346,000 of the amount you mentioned is agency vacancy savings. So that's why we were able to do that.
As you mentioned, the mayor's proposed budget also repeals the annual more than $1 million sales tax dedication for the reimbursable detail subsidy program and sweeps its remaining $637,750 fund balance. And I maybe want to just drill down just a little bit more on that to make sure I connect it to what you just explained in great detail. So thank you for that explanation. But specifically, you have an update for the committee that I'd love for you to share on how you all are addressing this.
Sure. So let me make a distinction between FY24 and then FY25 moving forward. So for FY24, the remaining budget is $870,000, which we expect based on spending so far to be sufficient to fund the program for the remainder of 24. For 25, what's been represented to the agency, both in writing and verbally, is that for 25, as part of the errata letter that should be hopefully coming to the council shortly, in this committee, that the errata letter will contain approximately $1 million in local funds for each year that will be offset by an equivalent dedicated taxes deduction. So what's been represented to us is the errata letter will include $1 million in local funds for FY25 and going forward. But I made sure I could share that information with the committee before I answer.
Well, thank you for that explanation. That's helpful. That's helpful information. I appreciate you sharing it. Do you know if the executive plans to restore any of the fund balance?
That I do not know the answer to that question. What was represented to us that there'd be approximately $1 million in local funds for FY25 and future years. That was what was represented to us.
Does the agency anticipate any difficulties reimbursing MPD for costs incurred by licensees in the current fiscal year and future fiscal years?
For FY24, we don't anticipate any issues. We have sufficient funds. FY25, that'll be up to the committee, obviously. Once the mayor sends the errata letter, that'll be up, obviously, to work with the committee.
Okay. Unlike a number of agencies across our government, which have seen some cuts proposed, APCA's total budget has actually grown 4.6% from $13.2 million in the approved FY 2024 budget to $13.8 million in the proposed fiscal year 2025 budget. What's the biggest driver of that growth, both in terms of revenue and service provision?
Sure. And the answer to both those questions is the increased growth of the medical cannabis program. So as the committee's aware, having worked with us, which we appreciate, I'm going to talk about the licensing side first. Obviously, we've had an extensive increase in licensing, where we had 76 unlicensed establishments applied during an open application period that closed on January 29th to basically try to get into the legal market through the social equity period that closes today. Not that all these applicants will move forward, but we had 150 social equity applicants for retailers and internet retailers. So, and tremendous growth there. Obviously, through legislation that the council's passed recently, there's a focus on increased enforcement. I mentioned the 4 enforcement positions. We have issued 26 written warnings so far. We're going out on a weekly basis, so that number is going to continue to increase. After warnings, enforcement will ramp up. I don't want to get too much off track, but we're seeing obviously significant increase in the program. We have our first testing lab looking to come online. I can talk forever, but the medical cannabis program in the district is growing.
Appreciate you sharing that. In the mayor's proposed fiscal year 2025 Budget Support Act of 2024, it proposes to repeal the Medical Cannabis Social Equity Fund and divert the $6.5 million in medical cannabis sales tax over the financial plan back to the Healthy DC Fund, and then sweep and use most of the dollars throughout the financial plan. And although the council hadn't yet funded it, the mayor also proposes to repeal revenue collected from fines for commercial property owners of unlicensed cannabis businesses that would have otherwise been directed to the fund after the first $100,000. As you know, I championed and created this fund, and the agency has repeatedly cited it as a way for APCA to address racial equity. As an independent agency, what's your position on the repeal of this particular fund?
Sure. Let me break that into 2 different points. I'm gonna first, obviously, our job is to implement whatever the committee passes, but I do want to talk about the impact of the fund just on that. So in a couple areas, So as you know, in the cannabis industry is a very capital intensive. It's very hard to get funding. So funding is critical in terms of the challenges of getting open. We have heard from some social equity and CBE businesses so far in response to this that this is going to potentially impact their ability to operate. One of the concerns is obviously getting cultivation centers and manufacturers up and running in social equity. So we've heard from some social equity manufacturers, cultivation centers, that they're concerned about that. And then obviously what we've seen in terms of successes, I know you may ask a question about social and racial equity, but one of the successes we've seen from social equity businesses is there is some construction cost to convert to the medical cannabis program, right? So you have some social equity applicants that could be impacted there. So clearly there's a need for money there. I think one of the other things, just want to make sure that's not lost in the committee. We just finished on the 28th, the medical cannabis sales tax holiday. Clearly those additional 4 days we did resulted during that 4-day period of higher sales than if we had not had that period when compared to other years. So as you may remember, council member, the fiscal impact for the sales tax holiday for 24 was $93,000. It is not funded beyond this year. If there is no social equity fund, this was probably likely the last medical cannabis sales tax holiday. So these are just some of the things we need to look at as we, look at supporting the program. But having said that, I recognize it's a tough budget year, and my job is to implement whatever the mayor introduces and the council passes.
I appreciate the job that you have, but I am curious to get your perspective on how the agency plans to address the issues that you just outlined in terms of access to capital for social equity applicants and businesses owned by people of color in the absence of this fund.
Sure. A couple things. One, we have had conversations, and I know this is budget related too, with DSLBD about the Just Cannabis Fund. So we've talked about specific amounts similar to what Maryland does with their fund of putting out toward cultivation centers and manufacturers. So the Just Cannabis Fund, making sure we take advantage of that fund. The other thing that's critical that we've worked with social equity applicants on, as long as they keep 50% ownership, they can bring in private investment for the other 50%, as long as they maintain a 50% ownership. So we've had a lot of social equity applicants that are 100% owners, and they're able to bring on investors as long as they maintain at least 50% of the business.
Let me make sure I have this correct. Two things. And I appreciate that you all are talking to DSLBD about the Just Cannabis Fund. But if I recall correctly from oversight of that agency, the Just Cannabis Fund as proposed in the mayor's budget is $300,000.
I'm just talking about working about the money that we have available. Clearly,
That is the amount, though.
No,
Is that
correct.
Okay. And what the mayor's proposed to divert from the Cannabis Social Equity Fund over the course of the financial plan is $6.5 million. Correct?
that is correct.
All right. So significant disparities in terms of the ability to access capital. And even if those conversations with DSLBD go well, the $300,000 that's in the agency's budget as proposed pales in comparison to what would be allocated in the financial plan if not diverted as is proposed in the mayor's budget. So that's number one. Just want to point out the significant disparities in the
Right.
amount.
No,
And then,
understood.
number two, it seems like a huge trade-off, though, if the alternative for these social equity applicants becomes trying to seek private capital and reducing their equity, as opposed to being able to look to the Medical Cannabis Social Equity Fund as a potential vehicle to access capital to run their businesses. And that to me is actually inequitable. So I wanted to just make sure the record is clear. I think it is racially, socially, and economically inequitable. And that I would like to be able to work with the mayor and her team and with the independent agency at APCA to figure out whether or not there's an alternative to this as it is proposed.
Understood, council member. I think, our agency always tries to work with the committee.
Okay. Just be candid. What do you think the viability is of the social equity licenses succeeding if there isn't a social equity fund?
So no doubt it's going to have an impact. I think we've talked about that. I don't want to say it's an impossibility. If I may move on to some of the successes we've had, council member, as you know, we had our first social equity courier, district resident owned business open up. We just had a social equity retailer open up in Adams Morgan that was a returning citizen. So we've had other social equity applicants that we're working toward getting open. So we've had success stories, but I understood that that will potentially impact some applicants, and just say it'll have more of an impact on social equity manufacturers and cultivation centers, if that makes sense, because those are more expensive to open.
Certainly. And it also, they're more expensive to open, but it also is one of the things that we certainly need to open in order to be able to address some of the supply side potential challenges to make sure that the retailers can keep up with the demand.
100%.
I asked the Department of Small Local Business to talk about the difference between their INNOV loan fund, and that's INNOV, INNOV loan fund. I asked them to talk about the difference between that fund, which was funded again in the mayor's proposed budget at $300,000, and I just referenced that. And I asked them to talk about that and the difference between the Medical Cannabis Social Equity Fund. And I want to give you a chance to, you already talked about it, but I want you to, if you can, hone in on what the differences of the two funds and the intention behind the two funds specifically are, just so the record is clear. Have any funds been used to date to provide equity grants or loans for existing or prospective cannabis businesses? And if so, how much has been awarded per recipient? It's a number of questions here too, so I'm asking them all.
Okay.
If funds are restored, how does APCA and DSLBD plan to roll out applications for existing and transitioning businesses? And how do APCA and DSLBD intend to prioritize applications for grants?
You're right, council member. That was a lot of questions.
I'm happy to repeat it.
No, I'm good. I'm good. So let me talk about the difference, and then they'll talk about the plan. So the Medical Cannabis Social Equity Fund is primarily for medical cannabis social equity applicants, right? So you have your cultivation centers and manufacturers getting them up and running, and then you have your retailers getting them up and running. You have your couriers getting them up and running, potentially a social equity testing lab. So it's really kind of more geared toward getting the medical cannabis social equity applicants up and running. The Just Cannabis Fund allows for a little more broader tangential cannabis businesses that maybe assist and help the medical cannabis social equity applicant, but not necessarily a medical cannabis social equity applicant. So it could be, I'm going to give you an example, like with manufacturers, it might be creating a hub where manufacturer licensees can operate and locate, right? So that might be, an example. So it can be a little broader, both critically important. So in terms of if funding gets restored, so the one thing we've had conversations with DSLBD and in terms of timing, that's critical. We've been working for well over a year with zoning on increasing where manufacturers and cultivation centers can locate. Zoning had put together a 2-page written document that's pretty much at the precipice of being issued any day now. So what that's going to do is increase probably by like 26 different zones where these manufacturers and cultivation centers can locate. And when I talked about the impact we have on social equity applicants, they're all chomping at the bit in terms of finding out what these new locations are and to build out their facilities and use this social equity money, right? So that's really the key. And you talked about it. We have to increase supply because we have all these unlicensed establishments that want to come on board, and we need to make sure there's sufficient cannabis and cannabis products. That's the balance that we have currently, is increasing supply at the same time bringing on additional social equity and other unlicensed retailers.
Have any funds been used to date to provide equity grants or loans for any existing or prospective cannabis businesses?
So that's a great question. So when we did the budget last year, there was not any money projected to be in the fund. Now for 24, I guess if you want to talk about in terms of moving forward, there's $191,000 projected to be in the fund for 24. I think the revenue estimate was $312,000 for 25. But because that was not done in the last budget, and Rebecca can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's been right. That hasn't been budgeted, the 191,000, but it wasn't there to ask for last year, if that makes sense. And just to be clear, council member, the ongoing conversations with DSLBD about spending the money that they have for 24. That's what we've been having ongoing conversations with them about that, and hope to get something out on that soon.
I'll give you another opportunity just to talk about any, you know what? There are 4 major programs at APCA, so I want to focus my next few questions on these areas. First, the committee has heard concerns about potential counterfeit issues in the alcohol industry and the need for APCA to be similarly focused on alcohol investigations as they are with medical cannabis investigations. I want to clarify that they weren't saying APCA isn't focused on alcohol investigations, to be clear, but more so that medical cannabis is getting a lot more public attention these days. APCA's proposed budget includes $3.65 million for inspection and compliance, which is a reduction of approximately $753,000 from the fiscal year 2024 approved budget. How much of that money does APCA plan to spend on the investigation of licensed and unlicensed alcohol businesses versus medical cannabis businesses?
Well, all the budget on the alcohol side goes to alcohol inspections. Did want to talk about the counterfeit alcohol issue you mentioned. We've had a lot of success there, and there have been news stories about our success on that issue. What it does require us to do is work with other states, and so we've worked with other alcohol agencies and other states to take enforcement action on that issue. So we have over 20 investigators on the alcohol side. We're not reducing any alcohol investigators in our budget, just to be clear. So I do think that's helpful. I think that the $753,000 reduction you see, the majority of that is the removal of the funding from the MPD reimbursable detail program. That goes under there. So there's some increases in other areas. But because of the removal of the MPD program, that's why you see the reduction of the 753.
Got it. Although the budget line item for inspection and compliance services is going down in the proposed budget for the agency, the number of FTEs is increasing from 24 to 27. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so how do you all propose to use those additional FTEs?
That's a shift due to the supervisor investigator and 2 investigator positions shifting from medical cannabis licensing. So those are going to be used for medical cannabis enforcement.
Okay. So how many FTEs do you have for alcohol enforcement? And how many do you have for medical cannabis enforcement? And do they do the same? Do they enforce, if I'm an FTE for enforcement, do I enforce on both sides of the house in terms of alcohol and cannabis, or are they separated?
No, they're separated it out. We do have a supervisor investigator that's doing both until we hire. We have a cannabis supervisor investigator position that we're hopefully going to have posted within the next week.
Okay,
But the goal and what we primarily do is alcohol investigators do alcohol and cannabis investigators do cannabis. We don't mix them.
okay. So how many do you have on each side of enforcement in terms of investigators?
On the cannabis side, we have 4 FTEs. The alcohol side, it's a little over 20. If you give me a second, I can count them up, but it's about 20.
Okay,
And there's, just to be clear, there's no proposal to decrease those numbers.
got it. Thank you. The agency management program is proposed to increase by about $1.8 million. Can you talk about the increases here in categories such as information technology, performance and strategic management, legal services and property, asset and logistics management?
Sure, be happy to. So the primary bulk of that increase is a new computer system. So a new computer system makes up the bulk of that. And then the additional FTEs that you mentioned, those are all here as well. So the increase is for funding of a new computer system and for the additional FTEs.
Which line is the funding for the computer system in? Is it in the information technology or something else?
It's under performance and strategic management and under IT.
And if you don't mind, thank you for that answer. If you don't mind stating your name for the record,
Rebecca Berry.
thank you. What about if you could just a little bit more detail on strategic management, because it appears to be one of the areas that sees more of a significant increase, relatively speaking. The strategic management line appears to be going.
Actually, that's on IT. Actually, let me correct that. The increase for the computer system is under information technology. The increase for performance and strategic management, that's where you see the 5 additional FTEs.
Okay.
There's 4 new positions, and then there's a shift from the medical marijuana licensing program.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
The agency's budget also includes a proposed increase of 117% for contractual services under non-personnel services. Can you tell us what the primary driver behind that increase is?
That's for IT.
That's for IT.
Yes.
Okay. How many vacant FTE positions are there currently at APCA?
Council member, there are, on the alcohol side, there are 5. We have, 3 investigators that, in the process of hiring for. So there's 3 alcohol investigators in the process of hiring. And then we have 2 auditor positions. So those are the 5 that are vacant on the alcohol side. On the cannabis side, we have, as you may know, we have, got 11 positions last year. Overall, we have 11 vacancies on the cannabis side. We have a public information officer that we're going through the onboarding process for. I mentioned the supervisor investigator that we should hopefully be posting next week. Shortly thereafter that, we will be posting the cannabis investigator positions. And then as the money comes in, we'll be hiring for the remainder of those positions.
And I believe you said earlier, the proposed the vacancy savings were approximately $346,000, and it's accounted for in the proposed supplemental?
Let me clarify that just so the committee's not confused and there's no misunderstanding.
Sure.
So the $346,000 is the vacancy savings amount that was taken by the mayor in the budget. That does not reflect the agency's potential vacancy savings, which we'll get to in a minute. That's just the amount that was in there. And I think after the first quarter, that was more in line with the first quarter, whatever you call the financial review document. So that was more in line with that. For the reasons I'm going to get into, the second financial review document is not officially out yet, but in terms of talking to Rebecca Berry, just clear for the record, she's the agency's fiscal officer, just so the record reflects that.
Thank you.
It's closer to $1 million, which so that million includes the $346,000 that is already taken in the budget. We have 3% COLA that we have to pay for. And then we're using the rest to ensure that the agency stays within budget. And what I mean by that is we have a projected revenue deficit. If you look at the cannabis 24 budget, it's based upon revenue of a little over 3.2 million. We've brought in 782,720. We're not going to get to 3.2 million. A lot of that is obviously want the zoning decision to come out, which will be critical. We don't actually collect licensing fees until we're ready to issue the license. So obviously the supply issue you referenced is critical. We can't let people open if there's no supply. So want to make sure we don't go over budget. The alcohol side, obviously, for the reasons you mentioned, revenues aren't going up every year like they were. Our budget for 24 is based upon us bringing in $7,115,388. We've collected $3,881,476. So we're in a little better shape there. I don't think we're going to get to 7.1, but it'll be a little closer than the cannabis side. So we've kept vacancy savings because I think you mentioned we're O-type. And so what we can spend is what we bring in. And so we're trying to be responsible and at the end of the year, not be under budget. Or, well, we've spent more than we brought in, rather. Sorry.
Thank you for that helpful explanation. Let me shift to talk a bit about CBE spend. And if you could share with the committee what your CBE goal was for FY22 and your actual spend. And if you could do that for FY23 as well.
Sure. For FY22, our goal was $210,938.18. We spent $360,815.48. So we made 171.05 of our goal, exceeding the goal. For 23, our goal was $320,827.68. We spent $331,578.03, and we made 103.35% of the goal.
Okay. And what's your goal for 24? And how are you doing on spend 6 months into the fiscal year?
Sure. For 24, our goal is a little over 197,000. We'll exceed that. As you know, first quarter is usually slow. I just have first quarter numbers right now. For the first quarter, we spent $39,867.88, which is about 22% of the goal. But like I said, our spending's the least in the first quarter. So we'll probably be in line with our spending for 22 and 23.
Got it. Thanks. I think you were here when I asked Commissioner Woods a question about programs and initiatives that perhaps need to be revisited to determine whether or not they're actually working or have the desired return on the investment as intended. Have you had an opportunity to look at the agency's overall budget, programs, initiatives? And are there any programs, any initiatives, any policies that this committee should revisit, perhaps eliminate, tailor, because they aren't achieving the goals that were intended when they were created?
Thank you, council member. We look at these issues every day, right? Our job is to be as effective and efficient as we can. As you know, and I know some of the council members have stated, the medical cannabis law, we've done what we can do to make this program successful. So we're going to continue to change things. I think in June, one of the things that we're going to be talking to you about is going to be having the 1-year conditional license go to 2 years. We have our first 1-year conditional license is up, I think, June 28th. We got the zoning decision just ready to come out. It's not really fair to say, hey, now we're letting you move to 26 different zones. You have a couple of weeks to find a location, right? That's not going to work. So that's just one example of, we need to work with the council to try to make that for 2 years. Now the zoning's coming out, right? So, yeah, I think we can continue to do that. I know you have the permanent bill in committee. We have additional suggestions. Another example, we have a testing lab finally ready to come online. And so we're going to need some type of grace period where for the cultivation and manufacturers to come into compliance with the testing lab, right? So the way the law is set up, as soon as there's a testing lab up and running, you have to follow that. So we're going to have to try to have some type of ramp up. So, obviously we've been working really hard thanks to the council, making it easier for the district to attract a testing lab. If we're going to talk about the importance of testing, we have to have testing labs operational. So that's another example where we want to work with the committee.
I appreciate you citing those examples. Are those examples, as you cite, is it possible that you can get the committee all those things in June to be done?
Yeah, so our
time?
plan is to work with the committee on emergency legislation for June.
Okay.
And we'll, as you know, we work well with your committee. You have incredible staff, as you know, and that will happen.
Yeah, there's been obviously an evolution to the medical cannabis program over the years. Not a whole lot out there to model necessarily, and it's resulted in a number of emergency bills. And I think there's a bit of fatigue on the part of some of the council members, and they're asking lots of questions. So I want to make sure that I think you're already aware of that, but I want to just make sure the record reflects a request to try to maybe limit the amount of emergencies that we're doing, and to the extent we can consolidate and address these issues at the same time, we'd love to be able to do that.
100% agree with you, and I appreciate the committee considering the permanent legislation as well.
Yeah. Finally, while I have you in front of me, I want to ask for an update on APCA's enforcement activities of unlicensed cannabis establishments and social equity applications. How many warrants have you issued? Have any shops been shut down? Have any fines been issued? And do you know how many unlicensed establishments are still in existence in the District of Columbia today?
Sure, a lot of questions there too. As of last week, we had issued 26 written warnings to unlicensed establishments. We continue to go out pretty much on a weekly basis for the most part. I want to, just so the committee has the full picture, I just want to explain what's going on so it's clear to everyone. So consistent with the legislation that the council passed, we're issuing warnings to start. We go out with DC Health. DC Health takes embargoes product that does not have a food license. So if you don't have a food license, they will embargo product, can issue infractions for not having a food license. DLCP also goes out with us. A number of the establishments we visited do not have a basic business license. They do not have a certificate of occupancy. DLCP has been issuing notices of infractions for not having a basic business license or not having a certificate of occupancy. So obviously, as we finish issuing warnings, in terms of what information we had, there were over 230 approximately unlicensed establishments, and that's a conservative number, but over 230 operating in the district. As we've gone out, some have represented their closing. Obviously, we're going to go back to verify that. Some have indicated that they intend to apply when they're able to do so. Obviously, we only have one open application period left at this point after today. So we're going to go back to establishments that got a written warning. We'll be issuing cease and desist orders to them. So they'll get cease and desist orders when we go out the second time. The council did pass legislation that gives us some closure authority. So we are working with the Office of Attorney General in terms of under what parameters they would support closures. So we are working with them on that.
Okay, and what about fines, even if issued from a sister agency when you all have gone out? Do you have any been issued? And if so, approximately how many fines have been issued?
Have fines been issued? Yes, they have, at a minimum by the Department of Licensing and Consumers Protection. I do not have that number. We'd have to reach out to that agency. We do track our enforcement actions, but I do not have the specific fine amounts that's been issued by DLCP.
Do you have a sense of the timeframe in which you're going to do the cease and desist?
So without divulging too much into our enforcement schedule, we have generally been going out to various neighborhoods, trying to get to every neighborhood once. We have already scheduled going back to neighborhoods we've already been a second time.
Okay.
So when we go back a second time, that's where we'll be doing cease and desist. If you really press me when we're going back, I will tell you generally, but
I'm not going to press you.
I'll just say it's been scheduled.
Okay, got it. Thank you for that. How many social equity retailer and internet retailer license applications has your office received thus far for the open application period that, as you mentioned, concludes today?
Believe it or not, council member, 150.
Wow.
And just before everybody gets, like what, that's crazy. That's how many people have applied. That doesn't mean that many will get issued or get through. Just by way of example, we had 30 social equity applicants applied as, I think, part of the 76 unlicensed establishments. And that's been dramatically pared down for a variety of reasons. So you may get a lot of applications. That doesn't mean that all those establishments, even half of them, would even open, right? So just want to be clear about that.
So 150 total. How does that break down? How does it break down between internet retailer license applications and the social equity retailers?
We can get that breakdown after today when it closes.
Okay.
I can tell you just from my experience, it's going to be well over 90% retailers, right? It's going to be almost all retailers. We're not getting very many internet retailers.
Got it.
The other thing I just want to put on the record so everybody knows is that retailers cannot be within 400 feet of each other. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear about that.
Okay.
And then there's no school or rec exceptions for the social equity period. They can't be within 300 feet of a school or recreation center, regardless of what the school or recreation center is zoned. Just want to put those two
Okay, thank you
criteria
for
out there.
putting those criteria on the record. How many social equity licenses have been issued thus far?
So we have as follows. We have a courier social equity that's been issued, that's operational. We have a social equity retailer that we issued last week in Adams Morgan, returning citizen, DC resident, big success story. Great to hear that our staff's worked at. So that was issued last week. So if they're not open already, they're probably going to be open in the next couple days. So that was issued last week. And then we had, I don't know if you remember this because we've changed the law. We also issued last week, I don't know if you remember, the equity impact enterprise, the 50%.
Yes.
So that one retailer license was issued to Bouquet Labs. That got the 50%, and the equity impact enterprise designation. That was also issued last week. So they're either open or probably be open this week. So those are the three. We have a number of other social equity, social equity applicants that have been approved by the board that we're working through. You mentioned the whole social equity fund issue. So what we do, council member, is we work with these social equity applicants once they've been approved to get them open and work to get them open. So that's why I mentioned the construction and the cost. So there are a number of other social equity applicants we're currently visiting that are going through the construction phase or getting ready to open. And you mentioned the supply issue. We have additional, not many, but some large cultivation centers that are opening, probably opening in May, but have medical cannabis in like September. So we have a number of retailers, including social equity retailers, we're shooting to try to get open in September.
Okay, thank you for that update. I don't have additional questions at the moment. There are a couple items you're going to follow up with the committee on. But is there anything else that you'd like to add to the record before we adjourn?
Sure. Just a reminder, today is the deadline to file a social equity internet retailer license. And then second, just want to thank the committee for working on us. We wouldn't be able to make progress without the committee. As you know, we're competing against Maryland that has an adult cannabis program. We have a congressional rider, so we work with what we can within the law. And so we appreciate the flexibility you have and knowing that we got to limit the emergencies. And so we'll work with you on the permanent bill to get what we need to in there.
And thank you for your testimony today and all the work of you and your team, particularly around the social equity and the medical cannabis program more broadly. So thank you for that. I want to thank everyone who testified today. Our next budget oversight hearing at the committee will be tomorrow, May 1st, 2024 at 9:30 a.m. And the committee will hear from government witnesses from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, as well as the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. There being no further business before the committee, this marks the end of today's hearing. The time is now 11:16 a.m. and this hearing is adjourned.